The song that changed everything. The neon lights of Nova Prime City glowed like a million stars, reflecting off the sleek, glass-covered streets. Hovercars hummed softly as they passed, and the air smelled of electric rain. The city was alive, filled with humans and aliens moving together in a delicate dance of coexistence. In the middle of this futuristic world, inside a crowded music hall, Elias Carter stood on stage, his fingers gently resting on the strings of his old acoustic guitar. The crowd murmured in anticipation, waiting for the first note. Among them, standing stiffly near the back, was Zyra, an alien girl from the Velmeri race. Her glowing silver eyes scanned the room, but her heart, if she could call it that, was frozen in her chest. She had never been in a place like this. She had never seen humans act this way. Most of all, she had never heard human music before. Her people did not understand music. They only knew patterns, calculations, and perfect silence. The moment Elias strummed the first chord, Zyra felt something strange inside her. It was a slow, creeping warmth that moved through her limbs. Her fingers trembled, and she had to grab the back of a chair to steady herself. Then Elias began to sing. His voice was deep, raw, and filled with emotion. The melody floated through the air, wrapping around Zyra like a soft, invisible thread. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. Something inside her shifted. For the first time in her life, she felt something real. The song spoke of loneliness, of wandering the universe without knowing where you belong. It was about dreams and hope, about losing everything but still finding beauty in the stars. Zyra's mind struggled to process it. Emotions were not natural for her people. They believed in logic, in facts, in control. But this music, this was chaos. And yet, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever experienced. Her body reacted before her mind could stop it. Her heartbeat quickened, her breathing became uneven, and she stepped forward without realizing it. The closer she got to the stage, the louder the music became, the stronger the feeling inside her grew. The song was inside her now. It was changing her. She could feel it moving through her body like a storm, unlocking something that had always been buried deep within her. Her hands shook. Her eyes burned. She wanted to cry, though she didn't even know what tears were supposed to feel like. The humans around her swayed to the music, their faces showing joy, sadness, longing. How could they live with this much feeling every day? Elias sang the last note, and the room fell silent. For a moment, Zyra thought her heart had stopped. Then the crowd roared, clapping and cheering. Elias smiled, his dark eyes scanning the faces in front of him. His gaze swept over the crowd, and for just a second, his eyes locked onto Zyra's. She froze. Did he know? Could he see what the music had done to her? Her breath hitched, and she turned on her heel, rushing toward the exit. She needed air. She needed space. The cold night hit her like a wave as she stepped out into the streets. Her hands still trembled. She felt like she was losing control. For the first time in her life, she was afraid. Because deep inside her, something whispered, "You will never be the same again." And she knew it was true. The forbidden sound. Zyra's hands still trembled as she walked through the cold streets of Nova Prime City. The echoes of the human song had not faded from her mind. The sound lingered, wrapping around her thoughts like invisible strings pulling her forward. She should have gone home. She should have reported this strange experience to the Velmeri High Council. Let them erase this thing inside her before it grew worse. But she couldn't. Instead, her feet carried her through the dimly lit alleys, the distant hum of neon signs reflecting in the rain puddles at her feet. The music had changed something in her. She felt emotion she had no words for, an ache in her chest that refused to fade. She needed to hear more. Her people had always warned about human influence. The Velmeri were a race of perfection, masters of logic and order. They controlled their emotions with precision, believing feelings to be chaos, weakness, a disease. But now Zyra understood something they didn't. Emotion was not weakness, it was power. And that power was pulling her toward Elias Carter, the hidden listener. Elias's small studio was tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, a simple room filled with instruments, wires, and old records stacked in chaotic piles. Through the half-open door, Zyra could hear music. She hesitated, standing in the shadows. Elias sat on a stool, lost in his world, plucking at his guitar. His eyes were half closed, fingers moving effortlessly over the strings. The sound was softer this time, slower. It filled the space with warmth, with longing. Zyra's fingers gripped the cold metal frame of the door. She didn't want to interrupt. She only wanted to listen. But something inside her was changing too fast. The music swirled around her, stirring her mind. Her legs felt weak. She barely noticed her own breathing growing heavier, her fingers twitching as if aching to touch something. She let out a small, sharp gasp. Elias stopped playing. His head turned toward the door. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "You can come in." A dangerous connection. Zyra's body froze. She should have run. She should have disappeared into the night. But her feet refused to move. Slowly, she stepped into the room, her glowing silver eyes flickering as they adjusted to the dim light. Elias watched her carefully, his fingers still resting on the guitar strings. "You were at the concert," he said, tilting his head slightly. "You stood out." Zyra's throat felt dry. Her voice cracked. Speaking felt wrong in this moment. Words were not enough. Elias didn't seem surprised by her hesitation. He strummed a few notes on his guitar, filling the silence between them. "You like music," he said simply. Zyra's breath hitched. The way he said it, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, made her chest tighten. She should deny it. She should walk away. But instead, she whispered, "What is it?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "Music?" She nodded. He let out a small, amused breath and set his guitar down. "It's a way of feeling." His voice softened. Its emotion turned into sound. It connects people. It tells stories. Zyra's fingers clenched into fists. Feeling. Connection. Stories. These were things the Velmeri feared, things she had never understood. Until now. And she wanted more. "I need to hear it again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias studied her carefully. He could see the desperation in her expression, the way her body trembled slightly, as if caught between two worlds. Without another word, he picked up his guitar and began to play. The sound that cannot be forgotten. The moment the first note filled the air, Zyra felt it rush through her like a storm. The sound wrapped around her, lifted her, broke her apart, and put her back together. She closed her eyes, her body swaying slightly, her heart pounding in time with the rhythm. And then something terrifying happened. She hummed along. It was small, barely a whisper, but Elias heard it. His fingers stilled on the strings, his eyes widening slightly. Zyra snapped her mouth shut, stepping back. Her chest heaved. What had she just done? Velmeri did not sing. They did not hum. Their voices were meant for logic, for data, for commands. But she had done it instinctively. Elias smiled, a spark of understanding in his expression. "I think," he said slowly, "you're starting to feel the music." Zyra's stomach twisted. Feel. That word again. This is dangerous. She knew it, and she knew it was too late to stop. Watched from the shadows. Outside the studio, hidden in the dark alleys of Nova Prime City, a pair of cold, calculating eyes watched. A figure in a long, metallic coat raised a communicator to their lips, speaking in a low, steady voice. "We have found her. She is corrupted by the human sound." A pause. Then the answer came. "Bring her back, no matter what." Chased by silence. The night air of Nova Prime City hummed with the sound of hovercars gliding through the neon-lit sky. Streetlights flickered in electric blue, casting long shadows between towering skyscrapers. The city was alive, pulsing with noise, but for Zyra, Standing frozen outside Elias's studio, everything had gone silent. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps. Her chest ached, not from exhaustion, but from something far worse. Fear. She had sung. Not much, just a hum, a simple sound. But it had come from her. It had risen from her chest, unbidden, unexpected, impossible. Velmary did not sing. They did not make music. They did not allow themselves to be changed. And yet, she had changed. Zira pressed a shaking hand to her temple, her mind racing. What is happening to me? Inside the studio, Elias was still playing, lost in his world of melodies, unaware that Zira had stepped outside. But she couldn't stay. Not now. Not when she felt the walls of her reality cracking around her. She turned sharply and disappeared into the dark streets. She needed time. She needed answers. She needed to understand why the music refused to leave her mind. A world that does not forget. The streets of Nova Prime felt colder than before. Zira pulled the hood of her cloak over her head, moving quickly between alleyways, avoiding the main roads. Her mind was a storm of thoughts. Maybe, if she went back to the Velmary High Council, they could fix this. Maybe they could make it stop. No. The thought of losing the music, of never hearing it again, sent a shiver down her spine. She didn't want it to stop. And that was the most terrifying part. A sudden click echoed behind her. A mechanical sound, sharp, precise. A sound she recognized. Zira stopped walking. Slowly, she turned her head. At the end of the alley stood a Velmary hunter, tall, wrapped in a silver-trimmed coat, his glowing eyes locked onto her with calculating precision. The weapon on his wrist hummed softly, a containment device designed not to kill, but to capture. Zira. He spoke in the Velmary tongue, his voice calm, unwavering. Come with me. Now. Zira's stomach twisted. They had found her so quickly. Had they been following her all this time? Had they already known? She did not answer. She turned and ran. The chase begins. The hunter reacted instantly. A blue light flared from his wrist as he fired. Zira barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side as a glowing net slammed into the ground where she had stood a second ago. It sizzled against the pavement, dissolving into nothing. She pushed herself up and sprinted. The city blurred past her as she weaved through the maze of alleys, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her cloak whipped behind her, her boots pounding against the ground. The hunter followed, moving with terrifying speed, his voice crackling through a hidden communicator. Target is fleeing. Send reinforcements. Zira's pulse spiked. More were coming. I have to lose him. She darted into a side street, leaped over a stack of metal crates, and cut through a small marketplace. Vendors shouted in protest as she knocked over a display of glowing fruit, but she didn't stop. The music was still in her mind, the echoes of Elias's song pushing her forward. Then, a second hunter stepped into her path. She skidded to a halt. The trap was closing. A desperate escape. The second hunter raised his wrist, another net device glowing, ready to fire. Zira's instincts screamed. In a desperate move, she grabbed a discarded metal pole from the ground and swung it at the first hunter just as he lunged at her. The impact was enough to knock him off balance, giving her the split second she needed to run again. She twisted her body, jumped onto a low rooftop, and pulled herself up just as the second hunter fired. The net hit the wall below her, fizzling against the bricks. Zira didn't stop. She ran across the rooftops, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Her limbs burned, her lungs ached, but she couldn't let them take her. Not now. Not when she had felt music. Not when she had felt alive for the first time. The hunters chased her, but she had one advantage. They didn't know the city as well as she did. She took every turn, every hidden path, using the chaos of Nova Prime's bright, crowded streets to disappear into the sea of life below. By the time she finally stopped, hiding in the shadows of an old, abandoned building, she could no longer hear them. She had escaped. But for how long? Elias's decision. Far away, back in the studio, Elias tapped his fingers against his guitar, frowning. Something felt off. Zira had been acting strange, more than just curious. She had looked afraid. And now, she was gone. He didn't know much about her. Didn't even know if she had a home here in Nova Prime. But something told him that if he let this go, he would regret it. He picked up his guitar case and slung it over his shoulder. He was going to find her. The hunt is not over. Somewhere in the city, the Velmeri hunters regrouped. One of them activated a small, hovering drone, its red light scanning the skyline. "She won't get far," the leader said. The drone flickered, locking onto something. A faint energy signature, a trace of human music. The hunter's lips curled into a cold smile. "We have her." The last performance. The rain poured over Nova Prime City, streaking down the neon signs and turning the streets into rivers of electric blue and red. The city pulsed with life, but Zira felt like a ghost moving through it. She kept to the shadows, her hood pulled low over her silver eyes, her breath shallow. She was being hunted. She could still hear the music in her mind. Elias's song. It haunted her, filled the empty spaces inside her chest, where logic and control used to live. She had been different before she heard it. Now she could never go back. The Velmeri would never let her go. Her heart pounded as she pressed herself against a cold steel wall, in a dark alley, listening. Somewhere nearby, the hunters were searching for her. Their footsteps echoed against the wet pavement. Their voices were low, controlled, precise. Zara's fingers curled into fists. They will erase everything. The music, the emotions, the new version of herself. They would take it all away. She would not let that happen. She had to find Elias. He was the only human who could help her. Elias's decision. Elias stood outside his studio, scanning the dark streets. He hadn't seen Zira since the night she had listened to his music and run away. He didn't know why he cared so much. He barely knew her. But something about her, the way she had looked at him like he had changed her world, wouldn't let him forget. Then he saw them. 3 figures in long metallic coats, moving together, scanning the streets. They weren't from Nova Prime, and they were definitely looking for someone. Elias's gut twisted. Zira. He turned back into his studio, grabbed his guitar case and slung it over his shoulder. If she was in trouble, he wasn't about to let them take her. The moment they found her, Zira barely had time to react. A metal device whizzed through the air and latched onto her wrist. A sharp jolt of electricity shot through her body, locking her muscles in place. She fell to her knees, gasping. From the shadows, the Velmeri hunter stepped forward. "You've caused enough trouble," he said, his voice cold. Zira struggled against the device, but it was designed to paralyze. She could barely move. Behind him, 2 more hunters appeared, their expressions unreadable. "It's time to come home, Zira," one of them said. Her breath came fast and shallow. No, she couldn't go back. But she had no strength left to fight. Then, out of the darkness, she heard it. A single note. Soft, gentle. A guitar. The hunters paused, their glowing silver eyes flickering with confusion. Then came another note. And another. The melody was slow, hypnotic. A song of sorrow and defiance. The hunters turned toward the source of the sound. Elias. He stood at the entrance of the alley, his fingers moving across the strings of his guitar. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with understanding. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew music had power over Zira, and maybe, just maybe, it had power over them too. The battle of sound. The hunters hesitated, their rigid control faltering. The music washed over them. Something foreign, something wrong, something dangerous. For the first time in their lives, they were feeling. Zira felt the device on her wrist loosen. Her fingers twitched. Her limbs were waking up. The hunters blinked, their expressions shifting into something unreadable. Elias's voice was quiet but firm. "She's not going anywhere." The lead hunter clenched his jaw. His fingers twitched, reaching for his containment device. Zira knew what would happen next. The music wasn't strong enough. Not yet. She had to make it stronger. And then, before she could stop herself, she began to sing. A song that couldn't be silenced. The sound escaped her lips in a trembling whisper. Then it grew. It wrapped around the melody Elias played, weaving together in a way she couldn't explain. Her voice felt alive, like it had been waiting inside her for this very moment. The hunters staggered back. One of them fell to his knees, clutching his head. They had never experienced music like this. Velmeri minds were not made for emotions. They were not built for sound that could pierce the soul. And yet, the song was breaking them. The lead hunter gritted his teeth, shaking off the effect. He grabbed the device on his wrist and pressed a button. The air around Zira crackled. A field of energy surged toward her, meant to contain, to erase. But Elias kept playing, and Zira kept singing. The force of the sound clashed with the energy field, and for the first time in Velmeri history, logic lost. The device sparked, overloaded, and collapsed. Zira gasped as the pressure vanished. She was free. The hunters were on their knees, their bodies trembling. They couldn't move. And then something even more shocking happened. One of the hunters hummed. A small, broken note. Barely there. But Zira heard it. And so did Elias. The last warning. The hunters finally forced themselves to stand. The lead hunter's face was twisted in something Zira had never seen before. Fear. "This is not over," he said, his voice strained. "The High Council will never allow this." Then, without another word, he and the other two hunters vanished into the night. Zira's breath came in uneven gasps. She looked at Elias. He looked back at her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then he grinned. "You," he said, "have one hell of a voice." Erasing the melody. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a cold mist that clung to the streets of Nova Prime City like a lingering ghost. Lights flickered in the distance, and the neon glow of the skyline reflected off the damp pavement. But for Zira and Elias, there was no time to stop and admire the city. They were running. Elias's boots pounded against the ground, his breath coming in quick bursts. He glanced over his shoulder at Zira, who moved with surprising speed, her silver eyes flickering with determination. The Velmeri hunters had fled, but they wouldn't stay away for long. Zira knew this, and she knew what was coming next would be far worse. "The High Council won't stop," she said, her voice tense. "They won't let this go." Elias tightened his grip on the guitar case slung across his back. "Then what do we do?" Zira hesitated. There was only one option. "We have to leave the city." Elias slowed slightly. "Leave?" Zira nodded. "There's nowhere safe here. If they catch me, they'll erase everything." Elias didn't like the sound of that. Erase. Zira swallowed. "They have ways of removing things from our minds. If they take me back to Velmeri Prime, they'll..." She cut herself off. She couldn't even say it. But Elias understood. It wouldn't just erase her memories of music. They would erase the part of her that had changed. And that was unforgivable. "All right," he said, adjusting the strap of his case. "Then let's go." Zira looked at him, surprised. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Elias interrupted. "I got you into this mess. I'm not letting you face it alone." For a second, she didn't know what to say. Then, without another word, she nodded. They ran. Captured in silence. They never made it out of the city. They had barely reached the edge of the lower districts when the world around them shifted. A pulse of blue energy rippled through the air. Zira barely had time to react before her limbs went rigid. Elias stumbled, his vision blurring. It felt like being pulled into a vacuum, the sound around them disappearing into a deafening silence. Zira's breath caught in her throat. "No, not now." not like this. She tried to resist, tried to move, but the energy field was too strong. A dark figure stepped into view. Tall, cloaked in silver robes, eyes glowing like twin moons. A Velmeri elder. "You've gone too far, Zyra," the elder said, his voice smooth, untouched by emotion. "We gave you time to correct this mistake. You refused." Zyra's heart pounded. She struggled against the invisible force, but it was useless. Elias growled, "Let her go." The elder's gaze flicked to him, as if just noticing his existence. "You are irrelevant." He lifted a hand, and Elias's body collapsed to the ground. The energy drained from his limbs. He fought to stay conscious, his head spinning. Zyra screamed. The elder turned his attention back to her. "You were our brightest mind," he said, almost with regret. No, that was impossible. The Velmeri didn't feel regret. And now, neither would she. The last thing Zyra saw was a cold flash of blue light. Then, darkness. A mind without music. Zyra woke up in a sterile white room. The walls pulsed softly, shifting with a faint blue glow. There were no doors, no windows, no sound. She sat up sharply, her heart racing. Something was wrong. The panic came suddenly, gripping her like a vice. Why couldn't she hear it? The music. It was gone. She clutched her head, squeezing her eyes shut. It had been there before, the echoes of Elias's song, the melody that had changed her life. But now, there was nothing. Just emptiness. Her breathing grew ragged. No, this wasn't real. She tried to hum. Nothing. She tried to remember the melody. Nothing. Her mind was a void, an empty space where the music used to live. And then she realized. They had erased it. She pressed her hands against her temples, a scream rising in her throat. This wasn't just about taking away a memory. They had stolen a piece of her soul. Elias fights back. Elias woke up in chains. His wrists were bound in metal cuffs, his head pounding from the attack. The air was cold, sterile. He was in a Velmeri holding cell. And Zyra was gone. He clenched his jaw. No, he wasn't letting this end here. A soft humming sound caught his attention. He turned his head and saw a small floating drone hovering outside the cell, scanning him. It spoke in a flat, mechanical voice. "The human is awake." Elias rolled his eyes. Yeah, no kidding. A metallic door hissed open, and a figure stepped in. Not a hunter, not a soldier, a Velmeri scientist. She regarded him with a strange expression, one that wasn't entirely empty. She wasn't like the others. "You played music," she said. "That is why they consider you dangerous." Elias smirked. "Dan right." She hesitated. "What does it feel like?" Elias blinked. "What?" She tilted her head. "Music, feeling. I do not understand it." Elias narrowed his eyes. Was she curious? Slowly, he lifted his hands, showing her the metal cuffs binding his wrists. "You really want to understand," he said. The scientist hesitated. Then, after a long moment, she reached out and pressed a small button on the cuffs. They unlocked. Elias didn't waste time. He stood up, rubbing his wrists, and slung his guitar over his shoulder. "Take me to Zyra," he said. The scientist hesitated again. Then she nodded. The battle for memory. Zyra sat in her silent prison, her body trembling. Then, a sound. A small one. A single note. Her head snapped up. At first, she thought she was imagining it. But then she heard it again. A soft melody. And then, a voice. Elias. His voice was muffled, distant, but growing stronger. Something inside her stirred. The Velmeri had erased the music from her mind, but they hadn't erased her heart. The music was still there, buried, trapped, and Elias was bringing it back. Her fingers twitched. Her lips parted. And then, she sang, the sound of rebellion. The walls of the Velmary facility hummed with artificial silence, a silence so deep it pressed against the soul like an unmovable weight. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of feeling. Zira sat on the floor of her sterile white prison, her knees pulled to her chest. The flickering blue light overhead pulsed in perfect rhythm, like a machine breathing. She had been here for hours, or days. She couldn't tell anymore. Because time didn't exist when you felt nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched her throat. She had tried to hum, tried to remember the melody Elias had played, the one that had changed her life. But the moment she reached for it, it slipped away, like a dream fading the second you wake. She was empty. The Velmary had taken the music from her mind. They had scrubbed away the emotions tied to it, locked them behind a wall so thick she couldn't even remember what it had felt like to be free. She should have been grateful. This was what she had been raised to believe was right. But somewhere, buried deep in the silent prison of her mind, something fought back. Something refused to die. Elias's plan. Outside the containment cell, Elias Carter moved through the cold steel corridors of the Velmary facility, his guitar slung across his back. He had no weapons, no plan, no idea how he had gotten this far without being captured again. But he had one advantage: music. And now, as he and the Velmary scientist who had freed him reached Zira's cell, he knew it was time to play the most important song of his life. "She won't respond to you," the scientist said quietly, glancing at the door's control panel. "Her mind has been purged." Elias scoffed. "You think a little brainwashing is gonna stop her?" The scientist hesitated. "We did not erase her. We only sealed the memories away. She has to choose to break free." Elias's fingers curled around his guitar strap. "That's all I needed to hear." He pulled the instrument in front of him and strummed a single chord. The sound echoed through the silent corridor, vibrating against the walls like a ripple in still water. Inside the cell, Zira's head snapped up. Her chest tightened. What was that? Breaking the silence, Elias played another note, then another. A slow, steady rhythm. The song wasn't a battle cry. It wasn't loud or angry. It was gentle. A call. A memory knocking on the door of a locked mind. Zira pressed her hands against the cold floor. She could feel it. Something stirring inside her. Something she thought was gone. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Her throat felt tight. And then, a single word rose in her mind. Sing. She squeezed her eyes shut, her breath coming in short gasps. She wanted to. She needed to. But the wall was still there, thick and heavy, suffocating the part of her that ached to be free. Elias kept playing. The song grew stronger, louder, fuller. The scientist stepped back, her eyes wide as if seeing something impossible. Velmary were not meant to be moved by sound. But she felt it, and so did Zira. Then, for the first time since her capture, she hummed. The Velmary's greatest fear. The sound was small, barely more than a whisper. But it was enough. Elias's fingers froze on the strings. He didn't dare breathe. Zira sat in her cell, her hand pressed to her chest, as if feeling something foreign. The humming grew. Stronger. Brighter. The wall in her mind cracked. And suddenly, it all came back. The first song she had heard in Nova Prime. The moment the melody had touched her soul. The night she had changed forever. A shockwave of sound and emotion surged through her body. Her silver eyes glowed with newfound fire. And then she sang. The notes burst from her lips like a dam breaking, raw and powerful. It wasn't just a song. It was rebellion. The facility trembled. The Velmary control panels flickered, struggling to contain an energy they didn't understand. The scientist staggered back, pressing a hand to her chest. The emotions flooding through the air were overwhelming, foreign, beautiful. This was what the Velmary feared. This was why they had tried to erase it. Because music was power, and Zira had just unleashed it. The council responds. Alarms blared. The Velmeri High Council had detected the disturbance. Deep within their chambers, a circle of elders watched the security feeds, their glowing eyes flickering with urgency. She is resisting the purge, one of them said. Impossible, another whispered. A third elder leaned forward, his expression dark. She is beyond saving now. If she cannot be controlled, she must be destroyed. The room fell into silence. Then the leader of the council spoke. End this. The final battle begins. Zira's prison walls shattered under the force of the music. The door slammed open, and Elias rushed in, his guitar still in his hands. Zira looked up at him, breathless, her entire body alive with sound. You came for me, she whispered. Elias grinned. Of course I did. Before she could speak, a voice boomed over the facility's intercom. Containment has failed. Terminate the anomaly. A hissing sound filled the air. The walls began to close in. Gas poured from vents in the ceiling, designed to erase them both. Elias grabbed Zira's hand. Time to go. They ran. Down the corridors. Past the stunned scientist, who did not try to stop them. Because deep inside, even she knew, this was bigger than all of them. The entire facility was falling apart. And outside, in the sky above the city, Velmeri warships hovered in place, waiting, preparing to wipe them from existence. Zira clenched her fists. No, she had been silent long enough. She turned to Elias. We're not running anymore. Elias raised an eyebrow. Got a plan. A slow smile spread across Zira's lips. Yes. She reached for Elias's guitar. And for the first time in Velmeri history, a human and an alien stood together and fought with music. A new song begins. The sky above Nova Prime City was no longer a peaceful ocean of neon and stars. It was a battlefield. Velmeri warships hovered over the skyline, casting long shadows over the glowing streets below. Their sleek, silver hulls reflected the chaos happening beneath them. The city's population, humans, aliens, traders, and wanderers, looked up in awe and fear, unaware of the invisible battle already raging. This was no war of weapons. This was a war of sound, and at the center of it stood Zira and Elias. They stood atop a massive data tower, the highest point in the district, the wind whipping at their clothes. Below them, sirens blared as Velmeri enforcers moved in, their orders clear: capture or eliminate. The entire Velmeri High Council was watching. And they were afraid. Because Zira was no longer just a runaway. She was a revolution. And her weapon was music. The Council's final warning. From the largest warship, a holographic figure materialized in the sky, a towering projection of the Velmeri High Chancellor. His silver eyes burned with cold authority. Zira, daughter of Velmeri Prime, his voice rang out, emotionless, calculated. You have defied your people. You have infected yourself with human corruption. Zira stood firm, her hands wrapped around the guitar Elias had given her. Her silver eyes, once empty and controlled, now glowed with defiance. This is not corruption, she said, her voice steady. This is freedom. The Chancellor's expression did not change. If you do not surrender now, we will have no choice but to erase you completely. Elias let out a low whistle. Man, you guys really need to work on your diplomacy. The Chancellor ignored him. This is your last warning. Zira looked up at the massive fleet, at the legions of Velmeri warriors waiting for the command to silence her forever. Then she looked at Elias. He gave her a lopsided grin. You ready for this? He asked. She took a deep breath, the wind rushing around her. She lifted the guitar in her hands, fingers resting against the strings. Let's show them what they're afraid of. The battle of sound. The first note rang through the air like a shockwave. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a blast of energy. But it was powerful. The sound rippled outward, crashing against the warships in waves, vibrating against their cold, emotionless metal. Zira played, and Elias followed, his voice rising into the night. Their music was alive. It refused to be silenced. And the Velmeri felt it. Even in their ships, even in their battle armor, they felt it. For the first time in their existence, they were hearing something they could not control, and it terrified them. Inside the main warship, the Velmeri warriors staggered. Their minds, trained to resist emotion, were cracking under the weight of the melody. The sound dug deep, touching places inside them they had never explored. For some, it was painful. For others, it was beautiful. And for one of them, one who had once been a scientist, who had once freed a human musician from his cell, it was a moment of understanding. She pressed a hand to her chest. And then, before she could stop herself, she hummed, the shattering of silence. The moment she made the sound, something inside the warship changed. The energy pulses flickered. The engines stuttered. And then, as Zira and Elias's song grew stronger, the entire Velmeri fleet wavered. The High Chancellor gritted his teeth, his glowing eyes flickering. "This is impossible," he whispered. "We do not." His breath caught. He was feeling. For the first time in centuries, a Velmeri leader was feeling. Not fear, not control. Something else. Something alive. And he could not stop it. A world that sings. The battle was no longer one of resistance. It was acceptance. One by one, the Velmeri stopped fighting. One by one, they listened. And one by one, they did something they had never done before. They sang. It started with a whisper, soft and uncertain, but then it grew. The warships that had once come to erase Zira now vibrated with an energy they had never known. The High Chancellor took a trembling breath. It is dangerous," he said. Zira stepped forward. "No," she said softly. "This is life." She strummed the final chord. And in that moment, the war ended. A new beginning. The Velmeri High Council did not surrender that night. They did not collapse in defeat. Instead, they changed. Because music could not be erased. Because emotion could not be silenced. And because once a song had been heard, it could never be unheard. Zira and Elias stood side by side on the rooftop, watching as the Velmeri ships slowly turned away. Not in retreat, but in realization. The sound of music had been introduced to their people. And now it would spread. Zira let out a slow breath, her hands still shaking. Elias glanced at her. "You okay?" She turned to him, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her lips. "I think," she said, "I finally understand." The first song of Velmeri. Months later, in the great halls of Velmeri Prime, something new happened. The council gathered in their towering, silver chambers, as they had done for generations. But this time, they did not sit in silence. Instead, they listened. A single note rang out. Soft, pure. A single Velmeri child stood before them, humming a melody. No one stopped her. No one silenced her. Because the sound had already taken root, and once music had found a place in the Velmeri world, it would never leave again.